She lay curled beneath the shattered wing of a downed scout vessel, her scaled body trembling, breath shallow, eyes closed but not blind to fate. Blood thicker than water, dark like spilled oil ooze slowly from beneath her lower ribs, staining the red sand of the desert moon where hope came to die. The sky above was a cruel shade of indigo, lit only by a fractured ring of debris left from a war her kind had never wished to fight. Her name was Vila, daughter of the Inari High Scholars, trained not for battle but for healing, for peace, for harmony. Yet here she was, alone, abandoned, dying not from her wounds, but from the certainty that the signal she'd sent would bring them. The humans, monsters, they said, war-bred creatures who tore through star systems not with words, but with fire, whose kindness was a myth, and whose mercy was poison. She had seen their machines tear through Inari skies, seen cities fall in silence, as orbital flames consumed the old temples. Her people had fled to the edges of the stars, whispering that if the humans found you, there was no negotiating, only obliteration. And yet, in her final breath, when her own kind had deemed her a liability, when her last flare of distress lit the heavens above this desolate moon, she'd made a choice. She'd pointed it toward Earth. The coordinates burned into her failing screen. It wasn't logic, it was desperation. Something inside her had whispered that if this death was to come, it should at least be seen. And now the night hummed with vibration, low and growing stronger. Not wind, not her mind slipping away. A ship. She could feel the sound in her chest before she heard the growl of engines slicing through the thin air. Panic clawed at her lungs. She tried to crawl, but her limbs betrayed her. She coughed blood instead, and with one last surge of awareness, rolled onto her back to face the sky, to face whatever death wore the face of a man. The ship was ugly. Not the sleek curves of Inari design, but a blunt, weather-worn shape, its hull scratched and mismatched with plating from other vessels. Human. She felt the last of her strength drain, like the tide pulling from a broken shore. The ramp hissed. Open, and footsteps to legs, heavy boots descended. She smelled oil, smoke, and metal. Her eyes fluttered. She was ready for it. A weapon, a final word, the cold silence of execution. But what came instead was a voice thought it wasn't booming. It wasn't cruel. It was curious, rough like gravel, yet strangely gentle. Jesus, what the hell happened to you? She blinked, not understanding, not expecting. The figure knelt beside her, not armored. Not a soldier. He had rough hands, streaked with grease. His beard was unkempt, his jacket tattered at the sleeves, and his expression wasn't victory. It was concern. Don't move. I've got you. I've got you, he muttered, fumbling through a metal case, pulling out vials and tools she didn't recognize. She tried to speak, but only a gurgle came out. She braced again for the end, but instead of cold steel, she felt heat, pressure. Gauze. Her side was being wrapped. Her body lifted gently into arms that should have crushed, but instead carried her like glass. He looked down at her, eyes storm gray beneath his brow, and in that moment she saw something alien, not rage, not vengeance, but sorrow. You're gonna be okay, he whispered, more to himself than to her. I didn't come here to leave anyone behind. And then everything went dark. Asterisk, Vela drifted in and out of fevered consciousness, her body caught between pain and confusion, and her mind tangled in a language that wasn't hers. The world around her no longer felt like a deathbed, but a cage of warmth and alien sounds. Somewhere far off, a voice spoke again and again, its rhythm strange yet steady. It came with light, not harsh like battlefield fires, but soft, flickering from a nearby lamp that cast shadows on metallic walls. The room smelled of rust, old leather, and something acrid that stung her nostrils. Her skin, though cracked and Dry in places, was covered with a strange cloth coarse but warm. She was on a cot. It groaned under her weight each time she shifted. The pain in her side had dulled, replaced by a throbbing pulse, wrapped tightly in some kind of bandage. She'd expected to wake in chains or in vacuum, but instead she was healed, alive. The voice returned, closer now. She dared to open. Her eyes, he was sitting at a console just a few feet away, slouched, tired, reading something projected in the air, his fingers moving across holographic panels with slow frustration. Human, no mistaking it, but not like the ones she'd been taught to fear. He wasn't clad in armor, no military insignia, no medals or rank, just a grease-stained shirt with a torn patch that read Kellen. His eyes met hers the moment she shifted. "You're awake," he said, putting the tablet aside like it didn't matter. "That's good. That's real good." He stood up slowly, raising his hands in a careful, open gesture. "Don't try to move. You tore through 2 of your organs and broke a rib. I had to guess at most of it." Vela's throat burned. Her mouth parted, but her words dissolved into a raspy croak. He walked over and gently offered a cup with a long straw designed for species without human mouths. She stared at it, suspicion pulsed like a heartbeat. Poison? Test? He noticed her hesitation. "Look, I don't know your species. I barely know first aid for mine. But I read the old peace records. You're Nari, right?" She flinched slightly, the word like salt on a wound. "Figured. You guys don't trust humans. Can't blame you. We haven't been exactly friendly." She took a cautious sip. The liquid was sweet, thick, mineral heavy. Her body responded with desperate gratitude, even as her eyes narrowed. Cowan sighed, pulling a crate over and sitting beside her. "I'm not military. I'm a junk hauler. Salvage and repair. Your distress signal bounced off one of the old relay towers I was fixing. Figured I'd find a wreck, maybe a power core worth selling. Didn't expect you." She studied his face. There was no deception there, just weariness. A life lived in vacuum and rust, not in conquest. "Why, save me," she whispered, her voice fragile, her tongue awkward around his language. He looked down, thumbs fiddling with a strip of cloth tied around his wrist like a memory. "Because someone should have done it for my brother." The silence stretched between them like a bridge waiting to collapse. "He died on Vorton 6, he said. Human camp was hit by pirates. He was just an engineer," Sonna began. "Took 3 hours before someone answered. By then, his voice trailed off. I swore I wouldn't be like them. Wouldn't ignore a call just because it wasn't profitable or safe." Her gaze softened. The war had burned everyone human and Inari alike. "I was left behind," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "That's what war does, leaves the wrong people behind." And in that tiny, broken room filled with the hum of an old ship barely holding together, a silence fell not of fear, but of understanding. Kellen stood again and dimmed the lights. "You rest. You're safe now. I'll wake you if anything changes." As he turned to leave, she gathered the courage to ask something she hadn't since the war began. A question buried under trauma and tales of monsters. "What are you called?" He glanced over his shoulder. "I'm Kellen Drake." And for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Vela exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, not in relief, but in the slow, uncertain birth of trust. The days bled together like watercolors on broken canvas, slow, quiet, uncertain. Vela recovered in fragments. Her bones knitted, her wounds sealed, and the pain faded into a dull echo of the memory. But what healed slower was her soul. Still, she noticed the way her fingers trembled less when Kellen entered the room, the way her tail no longer coiled in defensive instinct each time he spoke. The first time she stood, clutching the cold railing for balance, Kellen had only said, "Stubborn. Aren't you?" and handed her a rough-hewn walking stick carved from a broken gear. She didn't laugh. Benari didn't laugh the way humans did, but her eyes glinted with something other than fear. Their conversations were halting at first, mismatched in syntax and riddled with pauses, but they happened. One morning, as Kellen refueled the ship's failing reactor and Vela observed silently, she finally asked, "Why do humans build everything to break?" He chuckled under his breath, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because if we built things perfect, we'd stop learning how to fix them. That's the trick, Vela. Nothing we make lasts. But we keep making it anyway." She stared at him for a long time, absorbing those words as if they were a puzzle carved in stone. "Inari, we build for beauty, for eternity." He nodded, picking up a worn part and tossing it between calloused hands. "Yeah, well, eternity didn't keep you out of that wreck, did it?" She should have been insulted, but instead, she felt the burn of reality and the strange comfort of someone who didn't speak like a savior or a politician, but like someone who knew how to survive with broken things. Like her, on the fourth day, she limped into the engine room and found Kellen asleep with his back against the wall, a datapad on his chest, flickering with unread text. She knelt beside him, studying the human's features in the quiet. His brow was furrowed even in sleep, like he was haunted even in dreams. Carefully, without waking him, she read the words on the screen journal entries. She couldn't understand all of it, but the tone was clear. Loss, anger, regret, mentions of a sister, of someone he couldn't save. Her claws hovered above the screen, then slowly turned it off. That night, she asked, "Do you still blame yourself?" Kellen didn't look at her. He just stared into the void beyond the viewport every time I closed my eyes. And in that moment, something within her cracked a mirror, perhaps that had reflected only her own pain until now. She sat beside him in the dark, not touching, not speaking further. But her silence said what needed to be said. "I understand." They shared meals after that. Her diet was restrictive, minerals and synthetics his ship barely produced, but he scavenged and adjusted, learning through trial and error. One evening, he tried a stew made from protein gel and something green that glowed faintly. She sniffed. It was suspicion. "It's safe," he promised, "for humans." He grinned. "Well, if it kills you, I'll write a very moving apology." She tilted her head. "You're not afraid of me?" He leaned forward, face lit by the soft glow of the stove. "I'm afraid of plenty of things, Vela. But you? You didn't ask to crash. You didn't start the war. You're just trying to stay alive. And if I had been a soldier, then I would have still tried to fix you. Might have kept my gun closer, but I don't leave people to die." It wasn't just words. It was a thread, a lifeline thrown across a chasm neither of them had chosen, but both were brave enough to cross. She began sharing more stories of her people, how Inari architecture was grown from trees that sang during rainfall, how her father believed touch held memory, and how her mother used silence as a form of poetry. Kellen listened, not with idle curiosity, but with reverence. And then he told her about Earth, about blue skies with storms that howled like ancient gods, about music played on street corners, about coffee, bitter, he said with a smile, but it teaches you patience. Vela didn't understand the appeal, but she understood the need for rituals and pain, and slowly, like light warming the edges of a storm, something began to bloom between them. Not romance, not quite, but recognition. That beneath the scales and the skin, beneath the flags and the ruins of burned cities, they were the same in one unshakable way. Neither of them wanted to hate anymore, Asterisk, asterisk, the warning came not with blaring alarms or coded transmissions, but with a silent shift in the stars. Vela noticed it first, her eyes drawn to a blinking glint in the upper sky as she sat at the edge of the cargo bay, sketching patterns in the dust with her claws. The speck was distant, barely more than a shimmer, but it moved wrong. It pulsed. Like a hunter, she froze, breath caught in her throat. Her instincts, long dulled by peace and slow recovery, screamed now with clarity. They had come back for her. Kellen sensed her tension before she spoke. "What is it?" she pointed. "That ship. It's not yours." "It's not scavengers." He stood beside her, squinting toward the glint. His mouth tightened. "Inari?" She hesitated. "Worse, the Black Crest, our internal security. They don't rescue. They clean up what they think is compromised." Kellen's eyes darkened. "They're here for you?" Vela nodded. "And possibly you, for helping me." He didn't flinch, didn't curse. Just walked to the console, fingers tapping commands, scanning frequencies. "They're not broadcasting. That's not a diplomatic visit." She sat back against a crate, talons clenching tightly. Her voice dropped into a near whisper. "They told me if I ever encountered humans, I was to record, observe, and self-terminate. If captured, they didn't expect kindness. They didn't account for you." Kellen glanced over his shoulder. "Guess you're a liability now?" Her laugh was small, bitter. "I was already one. That's why they left me behind." He stared at her, something sharp behind his eyes. "Then let's not make it easy for them." That night, Kellen worked like a man possessed. Welding, rerouting power, sealing compartments, hiding evidence that a non-human had ever set foot on his ship. Vela helped where she could, despite her lingering injuries. But she couldn't keep her hands from trembling, her heart from racing. She remembered the stories, those taken by the Black Crest never returned. They were not soldiers. They were Eraser's dot in the dim blue light of the engine room. She finally turned to him. "You don't understand, Kellen. They won't just kill me. They'll scan my memories, extract everything I've learned. They'll find you. They'll find Earth." He paused mid-solder. "Let them come. I've got nothing to hide." "You don't get to say that," she snapped, louder than she meant to. Her voice cracked, trembling with the weight of what she'd been holding in. "You don't know what they do." My friend was taken because she drew a human face in her notes. They said it was empathy. They said it was infection. His hand slowly lowered, the tool still glowing faintly in his grip. "I'm sorry," he said. And it wasn't pity in his voice. It was fury held back by discipline. "We did that to you, didn't we? We made your people so scared of compassion that they started killing their own." She turned away, ashamed. "You didn't do it." "But war did, and the war started long before you were born." Silence hung between them like smoke. But it wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken truths, ancient griefs that didn't belong to just one species. Then she spoke, her voice quieter. "They'll expect me to cooperate. If I go peacefully, they might let you live. Or they might dissect you for being too kind." He turned fully now, eyes burning with something raw. "I didn't save you just to hand you back. We make mistakes, Vela. We burn things down. We act before we think. But when we love, we don't give up." She stared at him, stunned by the word. Love, not the romantic kind. Something fiercer, protective, unbreakable. "I can hide you," he said. "There's a compartment under the med bay. Shielded. They'll scan, but if I reroute the energy signatures..." She placed her hand gently on his. "They'll find me eventually, and they'll kill you for lying. Then we run." "You can't outrun them. Maybe not forever," he said. "But long enough to show them something they've never seen, that a human and Inari shared breath." and didn't destroy each other. Her throat tightened. She hadn't cried since she was a hatchling. But now her eyes burned. "We shouldn't have met," she whispered. "But we did," he answered. "And that changes everything." Outside, the stars shifted again. The Black Crest ship had begun descent out inside, two beings enemies by birth. Survivors by fate held the fragile truth that would soon be tested, that empathy is the most dangerous weapon of all. The next sunrise never came. Not because the planet lacked one, it had 3 suns, in fact, but because Kellen blacked out the entire viewport, sealing the ship in a shroud of artificial night. Every bolt had been reinforced, every access port rerouted, and every light dimmed to ghostly blue. The engines were shut cold, silent as a corpse, and the atmosphere scrubbers throttled to the bare minimum to avoid detection. It was like hiding inside a mausoleum, waiting for the grave to open. Vela remained in the shielded compartment, curled against the wall, breathing shallowly. Kellen sat just outside it, his body rigid with tension, a weapon clutched loosely in one hand, not because he thought it would help, but because humans felt braver when they held something heavy. The ship approached with the kind of precision that didn't belong to scavengers or traders. It made no noise, didn't hail, didn't shine any lights. It simply hovered above the ridge like a shadow that had grown teeth. And then it landed, not far. Maybe 500 meters from the outcropping where Kellen's ship lay hidden among the jagged stone and sand. Drones spread out first black spheres, gliding low to the ground, scanning for energy fluctuations, thermal signatures, deviation, and dust patterns. Kellen held his breath. He had rerouted everything. The ship read as lifeless, abandoned. But he'd been wrong before. One of the drones came too close. It passed within a meter of the hull, hovered, tilted slightly as if it smelled something. Wrong, then glided on. Kellen didn't move, didn't blink. Inside the compartment, Vela clutched a strip of cloth between her claws, his old wrist wrap. She'd found it on the floor the night before and couldn't bring herself to return it. Holding it made the air feel thicker, but her chest feel stronger. The seconds turned to hours. The Black Crest did not knock. They didn't call. That wasn't their way. What came next was quieter and crueler. Kellen had rigged the ship, too. Tap into external signals, hoping to intercept enemy chatter. What came through wasn't a signal. It was a voice, female, Inari, cold as vacuum. Projected across the sands like a song soaked in poison. Vela, daughter of scholar Trian. "We are here to retrieve you. This is not a rescue. This is a containment. You are marked as compromised. You will comply or will cleanse the area. That includes biological contaminations." Kellen's eyes narrowed. Biological contamination. That meant him. "If you respond," the voice continued, "you will be erased with dignity. If you do not, we will begin the burn in 10 minutes. Kellen's hand clenched around the pistol. He knew what a burn was. A slow-motion orbital fire, disguised as a geological anomaly. No blasts, no screams. Just ash. It was how the Black Crest eliminated incidents quietly, efficiently, and Vela would go with him, vaporized, her story never told. He turned to the compartment, tapped it twice. She emerged, eyes wide, already sensing the shift in the air. "You heard them," she said. "Yeah," he replied, voice low. "There's still time. If I go out," hands raised, "not happening." She reached for him. "You'll die for nothing." "I won't die for nothing," he said, and in his voice was something molten. "I'll die for someone." Her expression crumbled. "You don't owe me this." "No," he said, "but I want to." "You taught me something, Vela, that even the enemy can be worth saving." She stepped forward, desperate. "You don't understand what they'll do to you." He looked down then. "Back up. I know exactly what they'll do. I've read the reports. I've seen the broadcasts. They'll dissect me, erase me, use me as proof that humans corrupt everything, but maybe, just maybe, I can buy you time. Maybe if they think I'm alone, they'll leave you out of it. No, then we run, he said, interrupting. Her. We take the emergency runner. It's got stealth plating, barely enough for two. We punch through orbit and jump to the rim systems. After that, we disappear. She stared at him, heart pounding. You'd give up everything? Your ship, your life, your home? He smiled, but it was sad. I lost my home a long time ago. But you gave me something back. Something I thought I'd never feel again. What? Purpose? She faltered, breath caught between grief and awe. But then, the ship above them changed. A second voice joined the first, male, sharp, cruel. Timer reduced. 3 minutes. Proceeding with perimeter purification. No time. Kellen stood fast. Decision. Time. We run now, or we don't run at all. She looked at him, at the fire in his eyes, at the madness and the courage of his species. And in that moment, she chose, not because she wanted to live, but because she wanted his choice to mean something. Asterisk, asterisk, the emergency runner was barely more than a pod with an engine, a whisper of metal shaped like a tear, tucked beneath the main. Vessel like a last resort prayer. Kellen dragged the cover off with one arm and entered a launch code that hadn't been used in years. Dust shuddered free from its seals, cables sparked as life returned to systems once thought obsolete, and warning. Lights blinked like angry eyes. Vela slipped inside with grace despite her injuries, her body tense, her scales rising with alarm as she scanned the blinking console. This won't make it far, she said, her voice trembling. Kellen shoved the hatch closed behind them, dropping. Into the pilot's seat. Doesn't have to. Just needs to make it far enough. The pod shook violently as they activated the lift thrusters, kicking up a storm of sand and rock. Above them, the Black Crest ship pulse with alert movement on the ground had been detected. Too late, Kellen jammed a throttle forward and the pod screamed into the sky, its plating groaning with protest. The atmosphere peeled away like old paint. The void welcomed them with black arms. But the chase had already begun. They've launched 2 interceptors, Vela reported, reading the signals with cold dread. They're faster, Kellen growled. Of course they are. The pod's engine coughed, sputtered, then stabilized. The nav screen blinked erratically. One of the interceptors was gaining fast. In minutes, they'd be within range. Vela looked at Kellen. We won't make the jump. We'll make it, he said, but his hands trembled on the controls. You have to eject me. His head whipped around. What? Eject me? You can mask my pod. Give me a chance. If they catch us both, your life means nothing. Not doing that. This isn't about sacrifice anymore, she said, her voice fierce with clarity. This is strategy. Let me go. Let me tell the story. Let me show others what happened on that moon. He looked at her and saw not a wounded alien or a fragile survivor. He saw someone who believed in him more than he ever had in himself, and it shattered him. No, he whispered. I won't lose someone else, but the enemy was too close now. The pod rocked violently, warning alarms screamed as a laser. Bolts sheared past their hull. A second one struck the rear stabilizer. Flames erupted behind them. Kellen, she said softly, one clawed hand on his. Let me go. He closed his eyes. Felt her warmth, her courage. Then not a dot he rerouted. Power to a side hatch. Typed a command into the console. A secondary ejection pod, barely big enough for her, opened silently. She stepped inside. He looked at her one last time. No matter what happens, he said, you keep flying. She reached out, gently touching his face. I will remember your... Name. The hatch closed. The ejection fired. A tiny spark against the void, veering away silently, masked by the flare of their failing main engine. The interceptors didn't notice. They honed in on him. Kellen turned the ship, eyes hard, jaw set. He powered down the navigation, rerouted heat to the cockpit, made himself look like the only life form on board. He even sent out a signal. This is Kellen Drake. Human. Alone. No threat, but they didn't care. A blast struck the pod side. Metal shrieked. Oxygen vented. Flames tore through the corridor dot inside, surrounded by chaos. Kellen did not run. He sat in the pilot seat, chest rising slowly, and he smiled. Because she was gone. Because she was free. Because they wouldn't catch her now, the last thing he saw. Before fire claimed him was the stars blinking like distant eyes, and somewhere among them, hope. Asterisk, asterisk. Vela drifted in the black for what felt like eternity. The emergency pod was silent, shielded, almost invisible. She had no control over its path, only the trajectory Kellen had programmed before he let her go. Her claws shook as she watched. The stars rolled past the cracked viewport, her breath shallow as the realization bled through every fiber of her being. He was gone. The man who had cradled her broken body in oil-stained arms, who had chosen empathy over fear, sacrifice over survival, was gone, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. The pod eventually breached the orbit of a trade colony, a neutral zone wedged between contested systems, unaligned with any empire. The docking authorities were alarmed, suspicious, until the hatch opened and Inari stumbled out, bleeding from old wounds and gripping a black cloth soaked in ash. She collapsed in their arms, but not before whispering the name of the man. Who saved her? Kellen Drake. She awoke days later in a clean white room with soft light and no guards. Her wounds had been treated, her records curiously wiped. Someone had paid for her to disappear, but Vela did not want to disappear. Not. Any more. She began to speak. First to the nurses, then to the archivists, then to the travelers who passed through the station. She told them about the moon where she'd been left to die, about the human who answered a distress signal not with violence, but with bandages and soft words, about how she'd offered him her surrender and he'd given her kindness, about the moment he could have saved himself but saved her instead. People listened. Some laughed, some doubted, some wept, but they listened. She kept the cloth he left her, his old wrist wrap, as proof. She told them he smiled before the end. She told them he believed in something bigger than survival, that he believed fiercely, painfully in the idea that a human, and an Inari born from enemies and soaked in centuries of war, could choose another path. And slowly, the ripples began. The story spread not as propaganda, not as strategy, but as truth. Smugglers whispered it across spaceports. Children reenacted it with makeshift pods and dusty goggles. Some Inari elders denounced her as contaminated. Others wept behind closed doors, remembering things they buried long ago. Human captains began painting a single black cloth onto their hulls, not as a flag of death, but as a symbol of the one who stayed. Years passed, and in time, a monument rose on the silent desert moon. No grand tower, no military brass, just a small metal plate embedded in the rock near the wreckage of his ship. No coordinates were broadcast, no honor guard stood nearby. But those who knew, those who believe, found their way there. Some left messages, some left tools, some left silence. The plaque bore no flag. Just a name, Kellen Drake. He could have left. He didn't. Vela returned every year. She would sit by the rock where he first knelt beside her broken body and speak to the wind like he was still listening. She told him of the changes, small, hard-won victories, of the Inari child, adopted by a human engineer, of the first joint research vessel launched from neutral territory, of the memorial library built in the trade colony, where her voice had been recorded and preserved forever. She often wept when she spoke, not from sorrow, but from the unbearable weight of hope. Because hope is heavier than war. Hope demands more from us than hate, and she carried it year after year, because he had given it to her. And when the stars whispered in the night, she swore sometimes. She heard him answer, asterisk,